it's only fair they made this very sensational claim that it's really turned the country on its head. And it looks now that their claim was completely false, but they're still refusing to release the report. Mm-hmm. So they have to release the report. And if they don't, it's clearly an indication that the report is of no value and the claim is of no value.
Well, if you ever wanted to get to the bottom of something, perhaps doing so with a judge is a great way to do so. And today I sit down and interview a former judge of over 30 years who's going to help us take a closer look at some of the gapes inside of the specialists whose report contributed to the misinformation going around that 215 children's remains were discovered last year at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. Drea Humphrey here with Rebel News, and perhaps some of you are a little bit taken back by that intro I just gave, but unfortunately it's true. Well, it's not unfortunate. Nobody wants buried children to be found at their school. But it has been a hard task to bring you guys the truth that's available to us about the sensualized claim that came out May 27th of last year. And that was this claim, which was reported by the Kamloops First Nation band, that the discovery of 215 former students' remains have been confirmed discovered. Now, since then, I've gone with my BC producer, Matt Brevner, all the way to Kamloops around the year anniversary to when that claim was told. And the reason why was because journalistically, it didn't quite add up. And when I reached out to everybody who should be able to add some clarity for it, there was wall after wall and door after door closed on me. So if you want to find out what we found out on our 2-day investigative report, I encourage you to go to kamloopsdocumentary.com. There you can scroll down through reports until you find the Kamloops The Buried Truth documentary. When you click on that, you'll be prompted to become a Rebel News Plus subscriber for as low as $7 a month. And that will give you exclusive content, including the ability to watch this important documentary and much more. Again, that is kamloopsdocumentary.com. And today I sit to ask a few questions to former provincial judge of Manitoba for over 30 years, Mr. Brian Giesbrecht. He's going to weigh in and help sort through the facts and the fiction or the unknown area when it comes to the ground-penetrating radar specialist report, Dr. Sarah Beaulieu, that was used to help bolster what many people think has been discovered buried at Kamloops Indian Residential School today. And of course, the report that switched things up a little bit later, but less people are aware of.
Yeah, the Beaulieu report, Sarah Beaulieu's report, was really the only evidence for the claim that there were 215 bodies buried in the apple orchard at the Kamloops school. The only other thing that was mentioned was this knowing in the community, which basically consists of stories people tell each other, but it has no evidentiary value. So it was Sarah Beaulieu's report that was considered to be somehow evidence of the existence of these graves. And in actual fact, it was nothing of the sort. In the first place, the only thing Sarah Beaulieu detected were 215 soil disturbances. And although the press insisted on calling this a mass grave, and then they have for the past year been referring to the remains of children and bodies of children, National Chief Roseanne Archibald insisted that there were 1,600 bodies already recovered. None of that is true. There's not been one single body found.
We're a total of 1,300 institutions in total. So we're going to be into the thousands upon 10,000s of children found. I am not sure how you can say that that's not intentional, and that the recovery of so many little children doesn't signify what it is, which is genocide. The UN calls it genocide. We call it genocide.
And as a matter of fact, the most recent evidence about what those soil disturbances are makes it very, very likely that they are the result of a 1924 septic field that was installed at the Kamloops School. And I'll just go into a tiny amount of detail about that, not to stretch it out. But an expert has discovered that in 1924, in exactly the same area where Sarah Beaulieu searched and said she found possible graves, there was a septic trench installation at the school. And that consists basically of clay tiles or clay pipes, a few feet below the surface, 3 feet, 4 feet below the surface. And there would be no way of distinguishing by ground penetrating radar the difference between these clay pipes and a grave. And so in all probability, Sarah Beaulieu simply made a mistake. Number one, she didn't properly do her searches, as any archaeologist should do, and find out about the previous excavation. And there were many excavations on those grounds. She missed that. And secondly, she then concluded that these were graves when she had no grounds for doing so. Now, the
I'm just going to pause you right there, because you're making a fair guess of what happened here. But I want to let people know at Rebel News, it's very important that we reach out to people to get their side of the story. Something that we've already done. My colleague Adam Sos, who has talked about this, what you're talking about more in depth, and done a report. Has reached out to Dr. Beaulieu and got no response. And I have also reached out to her as well. So I just wanted to throw in there that when we don't get the answers, we have to look at the facts that are available. And it's only makes sense. What you're saying, it's definitely making a lot of sense, but continue on, please.
Yeah. And your point is the same one I was going to make, that she has refused to let her report become public. I think the Kamloops band actually has control over it, and they said they would release it, but now they're not releasing it. Now, it's only fair they made this very sensational claim that it's really turned the country on its head, and it looks now that their claim was completely false, but they're still refusing to release the report. So they have to release the report. And if they don't, it's clearly an indication that the report is of no value, and the claim is of no value. Now, in addition, though, Drea, to the expert evidence about the 1924 septic trench, there are many other problems that were evident when Sarah Beaulieu presented her report. I watched her presentation, and it's clear that she missed a great deal in addition to the previous excavations.
Knowledge keepers are all histories that recall children as young as 6 years old being woken in the night to dig holes for burials.
She made claims. She said one of the reasons why she believes those stories about children digging graves and why the graves were so shallow. And this is really interesting, because she says, she speculated. She said, well, the children were so young as 6, so perhaps they couldn't dig further than 3 feet into the ground, into the frozen earth. That was her speculation. Now, we've done some research, and the ground does not freeze beyond 3 feet in Kamloops. In other words, her speculation was completely faulty there. In addition, she said she relied upon a child's tooth, which she said was very clear. Well, that tooth has been analyzed. It's not a child's tooth at all. It's an animal tooth. She also referred to I believe, a rib bone and during her presentation. Well, no bone has been produced, and you can only conclude that there was no such thing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they would
and in my documentary, I do touch on that as well.
Yes,
so.
Yeah, and so they would have released it. But most serious of all, I would suggest, and why her report is obviously deeply flawed, is because she took it as a given that these stories about 6-year-olds digging graves in the middle of the night 215 times were actually true, simply on stories that were being told in the community.
One of the things I'm wondering, if we're talking about these septic plots, is it possible that children were maybe digging septic plots? Who knows? But I did speak to people who attended that school or had family members who attended, some on camera, mostly off camera, mostly didn't want to go. And at the time, after this claim came out, none of them they had heard. They all said, I've heard about it before, but none of them had any eyewitness testimony. None of them said, when we were at the school, that's when we knew it was happening or anything. It was always after the fact. Here's just a clip of one gentleman. Him and his wife went there for years, but neither of them knew anything about this.
I spent 11 years here. My wife spent 14.
At the school?
Yeah. And I'll tell you the truth, I didn't like it.
I believe you. Did you know that there was children buried here?
No, I just heard it not too long ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Now, it's very important that we, make sure we express there are some horrible things that happened at residential schools. And it's not that trying to get to the facts and the truth of this sensational claim is in any way denying that those things happen. It's just about getting the truth. And we saw a huge fallout after that claim. Nearly 70 churches burnt or vandalized in less than 3 months. And, the Canada Day is canceled, flags at half-mast. You say that we're entitled to get this report. What can you say about, is there any legal reason we are entitled to get that? Like the RCMP is just leaving this investigation up to politicians, essentially. So who decides whether or not the public gets this information?
Well, that leads into the next topic, I suppose, the RCMP's investigation. Well, the RCMP started to do an investigation, as of course they should. This would have been 215 serial murders and secret burials. This would be the biggest crime in Canadian history. And of course, they started their investigation as we expect them to do. This is what they're required to do. But then they simply stopped. And I believe that this is something that Canadians have to be told about. Why would the RCMP simply stop their investigation and turn it over to a group of local politicians? This would be similar to, there was a terrible a bunch of murders in Toronto a number of years ago. This would be similar to the police simply saying to the elected people at Toronto, well, go ahead and do your own investigation. It just wouldn't happen. Or in the recent Sanderson, Saskatchewan massacre, I think that's what it can be called. Just imagine if the police said to the James Smith Cree Nation, go ahead and do your own investigation. It just wouldn't happen. So,
and they don't have the resources to do it either.
Of course not. They don't have the expertise, and you would not possibly have local elected politicians, whether it's in an Indigenous community or any other community, take on this responsibility. The police have expertise, but what they also do when they do an investigation, they immediately secure the area so that evidence can't be tampered with. And they start investigating and questioning people. Now, it was some questions that apparently made Sarah Beaulieu uncomfortable. That resulted in Murray Sinclair, who was the former TRC commissioner, complaining to the politicians, basically, that the police were acting in a ham-handed way and and making Sarah Beaulieu uncomfortable.
They are now beginning to question those who have made this story available. And unfortunately, in typical heavy-handed and ham-handed police way, they are simply intimidating people rather than helping them.
And what a private citizen does is not my business at all. But at the same time, it was completely improper for the politicians and then the senior RCMP people to get together and simply decide to call off the investigation. Now, a murder investigation does make people feel uncomfortable. Yeah. I'm sure that the RCMP would be asking Sarah Beaulieu about some of the same questions I just raised and some of the defects in the report. But the fact that she is uncomfortable during a murder investigation, or that other people are uncomfortable, big deal. That's what the police do. They're investigating very serious matters. So the failure of the RCMP to continue with their investigation is something that Canadians should be told about. Why would this possibly be done?
Well, I'd argue that the legacy media hasn't been much help in this area as well, especially when it comes to setting the record straight. Thank you so much for your input on this, very important Canadian matter that seems to not get the discussion that it should. I'm sure some people watching are taking issue with some of the things that were said on this interview. So I invite you, if you have any actual evidence to support the opposite claims of what Mr. Giesbrecht said, please send that to me. You can look my name up on Rebel News and send it, because ultimately this is just about getting to the truth about what has happened in Canadian history. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, just fine. A pleasure.
You should know that you can get exclusive Rebel News content by going to rebelnewsplus.com. You'll get special shows from my colleagues Sheila Gunn-Reid, Ezra Levant, as well as the Menzoid Menzies, and you'll also get to view our exclusive documentaries, including the one that tells you the truth of what was actually discovered, at least what is known to be discovered so far, at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. Take a look at the trailer.
Well, the remains of 215 children have been found in a mass grave in Canada.
Many of you know that just over a year ago, the discovery of the remains of 215 children was found at the Kamloops Indian Residential School at the Kamloops First Nation. But what if I were to show you that what I just said wasn't true, and that in fact, a year later, not a single body has been found?
This mass grave is a painful reminder of the genocide.
Canada's leaders aren't condemning the burning of churches. No, they're endorsing the burning of churches.
A juvenile rib bone that surfaced in the same area.
You'd be surprised the number of people who say, I'm a doctor, I'm a paramedic. This is definitely a human bone, and it's definitely not.
Looks like the chief.